All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jocelyn King. I'm the CEO and founder of VirgilHR. We are an HR employment and labor law compliance company, and our technology leverages automation technology to get questions from you on leave requests, termination requirements, reasonable accommodations, and it analyzes what federal, state, and local employment and labor laws apply to that specific employee that you're working on. And then we provide prescriptive legal guidance to you. And we have a lot of other resources, a handbook builder, legal updates, the ability to contact an expert, but very much in the compliance space. And if you're interested in learning more about us, we'll have a QR code in just a bit where you can schedule a demo. And I'd like to pass it off to Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura Donohoe. I'm the founder and CEO of Elite HR Connections. We were created as a one-stop shop online HR community where HR professionals and small business leaders across the nation could connect and network, ask questions in a safe environment, obtain HRCI insurance credits, recertification credits through webinars, have access to tools, templates, and resources, job opportunities, find a mentor, receive HR coaching, and join HR-related focus groups, and so much more. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out, I would do so.
Thank you, Laura. And I'd like to point out two things. First, it is free to join Elite HR Connections community. And at the very end, we'll have a QR code for you to be able to reach out and learn more from them as well. Also, at the end of this presentation, we have the SHRM PDC activity ID, so please stick around for that. We'll provide that to you at the very end. And we'll also go through some questions. So please think about performance and conduct issues that have occurred in a remote environment that you have some questions on or would like to bring up, and use the Q&A rather than the chat function in Zoom to send those questions or that information over. We'll go ahead and get started. I mentioned that you would be able to use our QR code to scan if you are interested in doing a demo with VirgilHR. So please feel free to take advantage of that. We'll also have that at the very end of the presentation as well. Really quick disclaimer, this is intended to be educational. This isn't considered legal advice. Please make sure that any decisions or actions or inactions that you make are based on information provided to you by an attorney. So just educational related today. We'll go ahead and jump straight into our agenda. Today, we'll be talking about the remote work challenges that both employees and employers are facing. We'll discuss kind of these performance discussions in a remote setting and how they should really be conducted, and taking a look to not just at how we handle remote disciplinary procedures, but also best practices around misconduct identification and prevention. Followed by some tips on training and education that we can give, particularly to our managers, who are generally the ones handling these performance discussions remotely and are, of course, collaborating with HR professionals on, at times, on misconduct issues that occur. At the end, of course, if we have time, we'll go through the Q&A. So, Laura, I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you. And I'm sure, as many of you have already experienced in this remote world, there are so many challenges that employees and employers are facing. One of the most prevalent one that I've come across lately is when employees are feeling disconnected and not a part of the team. They're stressed out because they're feeling isolated. They're not able to connect and collaborate with other people. Being a human, we like to generally connect with others, and it's sometimes hard to do that in a remote environment. So we always want to make sure we're, as HR professionals, we're trying to reiterate to them how important collaboration and meeting with their team members can be, especially since we're not in a face-to-face environment any longer, in all cases. Then I would also like to talk about how setting boundaries for our employees is critical, because they can start to feel burned out if they're not working or feeling like they have a set time frame where they need to work. They could always be connected, since it's so easy, just to come sit at their desk and review email at the end of the day, even when they should be spending time outside of work, because we all know that we need that time away. So make sure that there are established clear boundaries between your employees and their personal lives. And they may run into technical issues as well, not just from a um standpoint of like losing connectivity or things like that, but you also need to remember that there might be security issues with what you're working on from a technical standpoint. So we always want to make sure that those types of issues are resolved for the employees. Um, there might be software problems. I know many times we've had, say, for example, Zoom issues logging into certain things. So just always make sure you're keeping up with your employees and making sure from a technological standpoint that they have all the needs that they to make their jobs easier and better. And then we go on to some of the communication challenges that they'll face. I mean, it's hard to read people sometimes when they're on a flat screen and you're not sitting across the table from them. So, misunderstanding or misreading those cues that they're giving, that can be harmful at times. So we always want to make sure that employees are clearly communicating with one another. And if there is tension or if there is a misunderstanding, to just make sure that they're sharing that information clearly. And then lastly, it's important to set expectations with the employees and monitor and hold them accountable. You need to monitor as an employer what they're doing and set the expectation of if you're expected to work certain hours or be available during certain parts of the day. It can lead to performance issues. So always setting that clear direction by the supervisor is critical. And then from an employer's perspective, there are so many challenges. And obviously, what we were just talking about, flipping that switch to the employer side, we need to be setting clear expectations, offering policies, um, offering training if needed, and just making sure that we are consistently engaging and communicating with our employees. I've actually had an instance where an employer came to me with a concern that they, as an HR consultant, that they don't think that this employee was getting the job done or performing as expected. Well, when I asked the questions more specifically, are you giving them that information and feedback? Are you checking in with them? Did you set specific timeframes you expected them to be available? And it really boiled down to no, they didn't set those expectations. So we need to make sure that those are very clear. And then on a continual basis, the employer, not just in a group setting, but the supervisor should be having one-on-one communication with that employee, and making sure they're feeling engaged, fostering a team environment, and making sure that the employee is still aligned with the organizational goals and objectives. Back to it from an employer's perspective, we also need to make sure that the data security concerns are met. Employers must address security concerns in a remote environment. I know my husband worked for a company and he just got a letter in the mail saying there was a data breach and PII could be exposed. So it's very important to make sure that your employees are taking proactive measures from a security standpoint. And then another point to that is, are they going outside of their general workplace? Like maybe that's normally their home. Are they going to work at a restaurant or a sandwich shop or something? And then make sure that they have the correct security on their computers and laptops so they can do that. And then sometimes there are issues with integrating the technology that the employer needs on an employee's system. So one of the employers that I work with, they had to make a huge investment and provide new technology to all of their employees to make sure that those systems and the software and the platforms that they were expected to use were able to go onto those new systems and the new computers and laptops. So Uh, Another area that is really critical in maintaining a remote environment, a positive remote environment, is clearly identifying the performance indicators that are required in that role. So obviously we have a job description, job posting, things like that. Those should be clearly listed and then followed through with the employee to make sure that they are keeping up with those expectations. And it's important for supervisors to be communicating with them on that regular basis, whether they are meeting them or not. So there's no surprises. And then the last thing that's super important, and I think sometimes gets pushed off a little bit too much, is maintaining a clear company culture. So when we were all generally in one space together, it was a little bit easier to develop and maintain that culture and do team building activities and have events and stuff like that. So you have to come up with new and innovative ways of doing that in a remote environment to still um, add and make those employees feel like they belong. And there are plenty of activities now that are available. You just have to do a little research, but there's team building, there's all kinds of remote opportunities that you can take and activities that you can take to make it a more robust environment and keep that culture.
All right, thank you. So we'll talk a little bit about performance discussions in a remote setting. So remote performance management strategies really are designed to effectively manage and assess performance for employees who are working remotely, right? So there's obviously this increasing trend with remote work, and so organizations are having to adopt various strategies to really ensure that their employees are productive, that they're engaged, and that they're aligned with organizational goals. So we listed out some strategies here that we think are really helpful when it comes to managing performance remotely. And the first, of course, I think always starts with, and Laura's kind of spoken to this already, clear expectations and goals. It's incredibly imperative that this happens, particularly in a remote setting, because they kind of just get lost out in the sea otherwise. So really clearly communicating expectations and setting, specific goals, using kind of SMART goals for remote employees, for all of your employees, but for remote employees is really critical, and ensuring that your managers are well trained on how to do that. And disciplined with the consistent follow-up and feedback that's provided is key. And in that process, of course, really establishing KPIs to measure progress and success along the way. It goes without saying that this should really be happening across the board, but it's especially important for those who are working remotely to help them not only feel like they're doing a good job and they're meeting the expectations that the business has of them, but that they also feel a sense of collective community with the rest of the organization when they understand how the KPIs they need to meet are impacting the greater business as a whole. With that kind of comes just regular communication. So it's really critical to schedule regular check-ins, have one-to-one meetings, but also have team meetings as well to discuss progress, address concerns, provide feedback. And so it's great when we're able to leverage communication tools like video calls and instant messaging and collaboration platforms. There are some incredible platforms out there that really help you employ listening strategies through employee engagement activities. But then there's also a really great access to communication through apps like Slack or Google Chat, for example. So really leveraging those and setting that as part of your culture is key. In terms of performance reviews, conducting them regularly, I kind of spoke to that earlier, is really critical to evaluating remote employees' achievements and their areas for improvement as well. And I'd always recommend using kind of a combination of self-assessment, peer feedback, and manager assessments. That 360 review to get that comprehensive overview of this person's performance, not just for the manager, but of course for themselves as well. Using technology for performance management. So if you're able to implement performance management tools and software that really helps facilitate goal tracking and feedback and performance evaluations, that's key. And there are a lot of them out there. And there are some that are quite cheap as well. So the big thing behind that is really ensuring that you're configuring it properly against your performance management program and set of best practices, but also from a change management perspective that you have buy-in from your managers and they've received the appropriate training so that they're taking ownership of the performance discussions that they have with their employees. Training and development. So offering remote training opportunities is a really great way of helping employees develop skills and staying updated with industry trends. So it's great to encourage that continuous learning through webinars and online courses and virtual workshops. And you could even take advantage if you have a really small budget or no budget at all. You could even take advantage of MOOCs, MOOCs, because it's plural. You can take advantage of a MOOC. They have free online training material. Some of it actually is quite comprehensive. So that's kind of a cheat, right? If you don't have the training and development budget, you can always go out and find free resources like that. I think a really big piece to performance management is recognition and rewards. So acknowledging and rewarding your employees for their achievements and contributions is huge, but especially when it's a remote employee who might feel a little disconnected from the rest of the team, for them to feel like they're being rewarded, but to also understand that the reason they're being rewarded is because they're helping the collective team or the organization as a whole really helps them stay connected to the overall culture and assist with retention too. So implementing virtual recognition programs really boosts morale and motivation, and it's something to consider. For feedback and coaching, this goes without saying. I think everybody on the call knows this. Providing constructive feedback on a regular basis is critical. It's important to emphasize not just one's strengths, but also provide guidance on their areas of opportunity for improvement. So offering coaching and mentoring opportunities to support employees in their professional development is a really great way of giving them that coaching and that feedback that they need. And then flexibility and well-being. So recognizing the importance of work-life balance and supporting employee well-being is huge. Laura mentioned that earlier, where there's kind of like a difficulty in setting boundaries. It's really hard when you are working in your home office and all you do is step out of that room and you've got your family that you're taking care of or dinner that has to be made, etc. Back when we were in the office, we kind of had this period during our commute of shutting off. And when we got home, we were home. So it's really important to provide that level of flexibility. If you're able to, in your industry, allow for flexible working hours when possible, and encourage breaks that can really help prevent burnout. And then when it comes to how we actually measure performance here, it's important to utilize performance metrics and analytics to track remote employee productivity and identify patterns or trends. And using great performance management software can really assist with something like that. So take advantage of that by using data-driven insights to make informed decisions regarding performance improvement in particular. And the last piece is employee involvement and empowerment. So involve remote employees in decision-making processes, seek their input on team goals and objectives. I mentioned from a change management perspective, if you were to introduce software, it might even be good to put a group of employees together and remote employees together to actually evaluate the software as well and get feedback from them, because the more buy-in that you get from stakeholders across all levels of the organization, the more successful your performance management program is going to be. The other piece too is really empowering your employees to take ownership of their work and contribute to the organization's success. So micromanaging is out. If you have a leader who's micromanaging, that's pretty toxic. There has to be a reason for it, and it's something that you'll need to look into. So adapting and customizing these strategies to fit the specific needs and culture of your organization is really crucial to effective remote performance management. So regularly assess and adjust these strategies, particularly as the remote work landscape evolves, which it inevitably will, and just keep a pulse on that.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And it's important to also pay attention to identifying and preventing misconduct in a remote work setting. Now, there's quite a few ways of doing this. The most important is always upfront setting the expectation through clear policies, clear procedures, um, and really drilling down into what is important to your organization and what is present in their code of conduct. What kind of behaviors do you expect out of employees while working in a remote environment? And this doesn't have to be just remote, it could be both in person and remote. But there are nuances to the remote work environment that we want to pay attention to. Are there ethical guidelines that we should be paying attention to and add so employees know that up front? And are they aware of the consequences if they're not following this type of ethical conduct or your organization's clearly defined policies? So they need to be made aware of those, what the consequences could be as well. So when you're developing and enforcing a code of conduct, you want to make sure it outlines all the acceptable and unacceptable behaviors. And you can have one for for just a remote work setting, or you can have it encompassed for the entire organization, no matter where they're working. And then you also want to make sure that the employee understands that and that they adhere to it, and to the organization's overall values and principles. One way to go about doing that is through regular communication and being open and transparent. Having those one-on-one discussions with their supervisors is critical. Keeping the channels of communication open at all times. Now, obviously, there are boundaries, like we were talking about, right? You don't want somebody calling you at all hours of the night. I mean, maybe you do if they're in the right time zone, and that's one of the issues that we could be facing with communication. So we need to make it clear if there's an issue, what the expectation is around communication. Do they need to answer at 2 in the morning Eastern time when they're on the other side of the world? So, and in some cases, that's not an issue because the employer is only nationwide or whatever the case may be. But still, you may run into an issue where you just, for example, a new client comes on board with the organization and you have an employee working in the Eastern time zone and the new client's out in California. And if they have a concern that happens right at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon their time, that's pretty late, 8 o'clock on the Eastern time zone. So you have to be very clear of what that expectation is around that employee. And then again, following up with regular check-ins, monitoring. Are you having weekly touch points? Or is the supervisor asking what they need, what the employee needs to be successful in their job? And is the supervisor setting specific goals for that employee to meet and then following up and monitoring those? And asking if they need help along the way, because everybody runs into roadblocks. It's also important for the supervisor, if they're noticing certain behaviors or patterns, to make sure that they're providing that feedback. They owe it to the employee to provide that feedback too. And I know it's not always easy to have difficult conversations with employees, but as supervisors and managers, that's what we signed up for. So through those regular check-ins and monitoring, a lot of times you'll be able to find out if an employee has technology issues or if there are tools that they're missing or need. So that's why it's really important to continue those conversations. And then on the flip side, it's also important from an employer's perspective if they install some type of monitoring tools or things like that to make sure that they are identifying and discussing any inappropriate behavior with the employee. So this all comes back down to what Jocelyn was saying before. There's a lot of training and awareness that needs to happen for everybody on both ends to make sure that they are following the correct procedures and they understand what the expectations are, and they're raising awareness about the potential risks of misconduct. So if you have those training sessions or provide awareness, that will definitely help mitigate some of that misconduct. And then we talked about before too, the confidentiality and data security. We need to emphasize the importance of what the employee is accessing, just like they would on a work computer in the office. Sometimes that information and data can be compromised when it's if you're going onto inappropriate sites and things like that. So we want to make sure that they understand that if there's that they're securely accessing sensitive information and keeping that data sensitive, secure, and storing it in a secure way as well. So if an employee comes to you and has an issue, we want to make sure it comes to you as the employer or has some type of outlet to share if there's an issue. They need some type of whistleblower protection. Who do they communicate that to? Is that the organization's leader? Is that their supervisor? Is that some third party? What kind of reporting mechanism does the employee have to report any type of misconduct? And potentially anonymously, because they don't necessarily have to provide their contact information. And then we want to make sure as an employer that you're clearly communicating the organization's commitment to protecting whistleblowers from any type of retaliation. And then, as always, one of the main reasons HR tends to be around is for legal compliance. We want to make sure that the remote work policies are complied with and they are relevant up against the current labor laws. There are always legislation issues and changes and updates, and we want to make sure that our policies are following that and all the other legal requirements that they may need to follow. So make sure you're staying up to date and informed on all the legal changes, updates, and how they're impacting remote work. And then last but not least, what about our employees' health and mental health and awareness and all of that? We need to make sure that we are still providing access to EAPs and programs for employees. So if they're feeling burned out, if they're feeling overwhelmed, because this is a whole new world. I mean, yes, we've been doing it for 4 years now, but it still can take on different changes when we don't know what an employee is going through in their personal lives. So we need to be very cognizant of that and make sure that we are providing a supportive, helpful workplace environment, and employees can seek help and advice when they need it.
All right, thank you. So we're going to talk about remote disciplinary procedures. So here's the thing with them. I would actually love the audience's opinion on this. And if you have anything to share, please put it in the Q&A. I don't think that the way that the stages of a remote disciplinary procedure that we have listed here is any different than the way that we would be doing it in person. So we have documentation, of course, we're gathering evidence, there's notification, the employee is informed of the allegation, there's the investigation itself where we are reviewing facts and documents and interviewing witnesses. There's a meeting after the fact between the employee and their supervisor, or maybe it's just the employee and HR to discuss allegations and give them an opportunity to respond. And then there's the decision, right, that you make at the end of it. I think, excuse me, instead, what is really important to consider in this situation is how we humanize this process. So, when you're notifying an individual that allegations have been made against them, technically you could tell them by email, you could tell them with a phone call, you could do video conference. Personally, I would always suggest you do video conference. It's as if you're meeting with them in person in the office, and it is a much more personal way of having this conversation rather than doing it by email or by phone. And then when you are conducting kind of the conversation after you've made a decision about this, it's really key, again, to bring a lot of empathy into the conversation, especially because there's no body language to read. You're kind of just staring at a screen when you're having this conversation with someone, and so it can feel a bit dehumanizing, and especially for those misconduct issues that are slight in nature. The last thing you want to do is alienate an employee from the organization by giving them a bad experience. Obviously, if it's egregious in nature, they probably aren't going to be staying at your company anyway. But the key thing is making sure that the experience that people have, despite it being negative most of the time, is still done in a way that brings some dignity to them as an individual, and really reflects the culture that you have as an organization as well. So that's kind of what I wanted to share there about that. I do think that the rest of it is pretty cut and dry, the way that we would always handle disciplinary procedure. But if you disagree with me, I would love to hear that. The last thing I wanted to talk about was training and education. So really, what we're thinking about is the training and education should typically be focused on equipping managers, since they're the ones who are handling performance. Maybe they're doing a little bit of misconduct, especially when misconduct is flagged in particular. So we want to focus on a few things. The first is remote work policies and procedures. It's really key that all stakeholders in the organization have a really good understanding of the organization's remote work policies, including expectations for remote workers, communication protocols, performance standards, and then procedures for reporting misconduct or performance issues, of course. An area of training that's also really critical is communication skills, right? So it's really important to effectively communicate in a remote work environment. And when you're able to provide training that focuses on communication best practices, including, clear and concise messaging, active listening, and also the use of communication tools and technologies, you're setting your workforce up for success. And in particular, you're setting your managers up for success to be the best managers they can be for their remote employees. Continuous education on performance management is also critical, not just of the technology that you're using, but the best practices in themselves. And so I would really encourage you as an HR leader to identify through your performance or talent development process, program, software, whatever it is you're using, identify where some of these managers might have some areas of opportunity for improvement, particularly around areas of coaching and feedback. So it's important that they really receive that training to set clear performance expectations with their employees, understand how to monitor the remote workers' performance, and really provide that feedback and recognition and addressing performance issues in a timely and a constructive manner at that. So I think that HR should really take ownership of that and work closely with managers to ensure that they have the training they need to perform successfully. Remote leadership skills kind of falls in line with this, with the performance training I mentioned here too. So the expectation as a manager, if you have remote workers, is that you have remote leadership skills. So managers should really be leading remote teams to really kind of promote team cohesion, to support employee well-being, to foster trust and collaboration, even managing virtual meetings, all really key, and that should be included as part of your training. Conflict resolution is a huge one. So training on conflict resolution techniques can really help managers and employees address disagreements and conflicts that arise in a remote work environment, which happens a lot, only because, again, it's really difficult when you don't get the full picture on what's going on in an organization, or you're feeling isolated, you're not having regular one-to-ones, whatever it may be. It can create kind of heightened sense of emotion for individuals, and it might make for a really difficult conversation. So strategies to help manage difficult conversations and resolve interpersonal conflict and promote a positive work environment is going to be really key. Laura spoke a little bit about legal compliance. So legal and compliance considerations, there really has to be training that covers relevant employment laws and regulations related to remote work and performance management and disciplinary procedures. So, these are going to be topic areas like privacy and data security, of course, discrimination and harassment prevention and compliance with labor laws as well. So all really critical. They should have a pretty good understanding, especially if you have a more blue collar workforce or a workforce with more non-exempt employees, that they have a really good understanding of labor laws in particular as they relate to even overtime. And they have a really good visualization as to how many hours their employees are actually working and when they do qualify for overtime. Ethical conduct. So employees should really be receiving training on the organization's code of conduct, as well as ethical standards. So this would include expectations for professional behavior, for integrity, and for accountability in a remote work setting. And then lastly here is technology training. So providing training on the use of remote work technologies and tools can really help employees effectively perform their job duties and stay connected with colleagues as well. So this may include training on virtual collaboration platforms, project management tools, and even cybersecurity best practices, all things to consider. Okay, so we're at the very end of our session.